it's a long time, but it's also a short time. Because in looking at local government reforms, I describe it as Nigerians' unfinished journey. And I will be focusing mainly on the milestones so that I do not bore you with too many details. Now, good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Local government, of course, as Deborah has said, is the closest tier of government to the people. And its success or failure affect the daily lives of Nigerians. The local government, of course, is consistently regarded as the third tier, and it has undergone a series of dramatic reforms since 1976, even though we can trace the local government system to the colonial era. Now, the debates that is going on right now is provoked by the July 2024 ruling of the Supreme Court decision on local government financial autonomy, which creates a pivotal moment that has put the searchlight on local government. But a critical survey published early in 2023 says Nigerians have very little trust in their local governments because local government has performed below expectation. In fact, only 6.4% of Nigerians thinks local government can be relied upon for any kind of service at all. Now, this reflection is important because there are lessons that we can learn from the achievements, setbacks, and also we can also chart future directions for local government. So reflection is not just to recount history, but to extract lessons for better governance and service delivery. Before 1976, which is a major milestone in the reform of local government in Nigeria, the foundation of local government was set in the colonial era under the indirect rule system, where native authorities were the main anchors of local government. By the time we approach independence, the different regions took different parts in terms of how they conceive of local government. But in general, there was no single local government system across the country. So the first thing that was done by the 1976 reform is to standardize a nationwide local government system and introduce the local government as the third tier of Nigeria's three-tier federal system. Now, this standardized local government system created some challenges. For instance, it merged villages while splitting cities, often leading to fragmented governance. Yet, the aim was to democratize local government and to strengthen local government by making 5% of federation pool resources available to local government. These reforms, of course, were consolidated in the 1979 Constitution, which officially listed local government as the third tier. But more than that, it guaranteed what it calls a democratically elected government at the local government level. But that constitution, of course, did not provide sufficient clarification in terms of the relationship between the federal government and the state government on local government matters. And what then happened was that while retaining functions of local government and giving the state houses of assembly the powers to define how those functions are carried out, details of legislation was left unattended to. So when the Second Republic collapsed and the military came, they set up a committee to look at local government reforms as started with the 1976 reforms, because they noticed that under that Second Republic, many states created local government arbitrarily, and the number of local government increased phenomenally. So the Dasuki Committee was to help streamline that process and create a basis and criteria for reviewing local government at intervals based on certain criteria, including the minimum size of population. But that reform itself was problematic in terms of its implementation until 1987, when the Political Bureau was set up to define a system of government for Nigeria under the Babangida government. Now, the Bureau paid particular attention to local governments and suggested a three-tier kind of local government, beginning from the neighborhood level, where you have neighbors conscious of their own needs coming together to discuss and passing it on to a higher level, which they describe as the development areas, or normally the natural communities of people or villages. And then, of course, the local government were then supposed to be the apex government at the local level, coordinating neighborhoods and communities to achieve local needs and aspirations. But that was never implemented until 1988, when the Phillips reform was conducted on the Nigerian Public Service. But what the Phillips reform suggested for local government is to focus on the nature of the bureaucracy that exists at the local government level. And so it defines the structure of administrative process in local government, especially concerning recruitment, promotion, and discipline of local government officials, and give the Local Government Service Commission at the state level the powers to play a very vital role in local government. And of course, it also makes a distinction between political office holders and career civil servants to ensure that there's some professionalism at the local government level. This was the situations throughout the period of the military era, where at some moments local governments, democratically elected local governments were abolished. At other times, elections were conducted and additional governments were created. And you find a situation where the very fine ideas about local government were implemented in a very haphazard manner. And these inconsistencies eroded democratic norms. Under the 1999 Constitution, of course, most of the content of the reforms were consolidated in the Constitution, including the joint states local government account. And the names of local government for the first time were listed in the Constitution, and provisions were made to ensure that accountability of local governments is guaranteed. But there were also several loopholes that were not defined in terms of the role of state governments in conducting local government elections, the existence of CX, and the rules and guidelines that should guide the operation of CX. These loopholes created major problems, such that we are now faced with a situation where the debates are that many state governors ignored the constitutional provisions of the democratic local governments, appointed caretaker committees, and refrained from holding regular elections. All this means that the aspirations of the constitutions and the fine provisions of many committees and reports that preceded the 1999 Constitution were never fulfilled. And so there's a persistent debate over autonomy, funding, and effectiveness of local governments. Now, recent judicial interventions did not only provoke the current debate, it also shows the challenges that comes with the reform of local government. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that caretaker committees and the withholding of funds by state governments are not acceptable, and that allocations must flow directly to local government. So local governments without elected officials will not receive funds from the federal government. But we must remember that when President Obasanjo was in government, local government revenue were directly paid to local government until the state government went to court and get the support of the court that money should be spread to the local government joint account. So we have had this experience of when monies were paid directly to local government and the one we are aspiring to happen with the recent Supreme Court judgment. What happened then is what noting. The first is that we had two major issues. First is what we call the non-correspondence problem. Local governments had money, but they were not supported by accountability structures that created problems in terms of what those monies were used for. And as the former chairman, two-time chairman of local government pointed out, people really wondered what local governments were doing with their money. He mentioned about absentee chairman, which he said it's not the general rule, but there was also the question of local government failing to pay teachers, primary school teachers' salaries. And you find that recently also with the local government in the FCT. And there was also the issue of local government organizing to create a political party to challenge state governors and determine which state governor will return. So these are major problems that we also still need to look at. Probably that's why state governors hesitate to obey the court order. Now, more important is also that it is not only the Supreme Court's decision that we are dealing with. State houses of assembly have also made laws to undercut the decision. For instance, the Anambra state law requires local government allocations to state government accounts, even when they receive it. So we also need to deal with that. State houses of assembly have authority to legislate on local governments. I will just conclude by outlining some of the major challenges. One is state government domination, especially through their powers to conduct elections for local government. So after the Supreme Court judgment, they have conducted elections, but as we see, especially if you look at the last election, which is local government, Lagos state elections, you find that over 300 councillors all won by the ruling party, except one. And it's so state, and many of us have described those elections as sham elections or facade elections. But at least, as we have all agreed, they fulfill the first part of the requirements of the Supreme Court's judgment. Secondly, state interference, of course, has continued, and we need to also think about that. Then, financial and administrative weaknesses. Local government, of course, have very low capacity for revenue generation. Well, there's no evidence that they have low capacity for corruption. And the other important point is also that these local governments are fragmented, and we need to deal with the question of villages being merged and cities being split, which is very disruptive of effective urban governance and planning. Then, of course, is the important point about democratic deficits. CX are partisan, they are underfunded, and leading to non-credible elections. How do we make governors prioritize legitimacy over control of local government? Lessons learned so far. Yeah, autonomy is very essential. Without financial and administrative autonomy, local government remain ineffective. There's need for strong institutions at government level, skilled personnel, which are crucial for service delivery. So capacity building is important. Then community participation is the live wire of democracy, and sustainable development happens when communities are involved in decision making. Absent that, local government cannot be said to be local. And so we have these reports, we have these decisions, we have all kinds of ideas about how to strengthen the government, but they must not be allowed to gather dust. Implementation is very critical, but implementation cannot happen without political commitment at both national and state level. What it then means is that we're happy the minister has made the point that they are given dialogue and negotiation a very important place. At the Agora policy notes, we made the point that without negotiation, no government would get compliance with that decision. And it is good that dialogue, persuasion, and consultation will go on in determining the kind of local government Nigeria wants. Then, of course, this will involve amendments of laws, probably including also the Constitution, to safeguard local government independence, including the conduct of elections, this strengthening SEC or reinforcing their independence will be very crucial. And finally, I think it's important for us to revisit the political bureau's recommendation of a three-tiered model of local government, so that we can have local government that speak right from the neighborhood up through the wards to the local government level. This will be very critical as we look towards implementing further reforms. This will be supported also by the setting up of accountability framework with anti-corruption mechanisms like public audits and citizens oversight. So over 50 years, reform is still at a critical junction. We have seen a mixed result of progress in terms of structural frameworks, but predatory state politics and weak accountability continues to endure. So systemic change demands that citizens are mobilized in order to achieve a stronger local government system. And we need to also define clearer intergovernmental rules and look about autonomy in terms of institutionalization rather than an administrative matter. So strengthening local government is not just an administrative task, it is key to national development, peace, and social justice. Local democracy is not just about election, it's about empowering communities to own their own development. Thank you for your attention.